Hello and welcome to Student Affairs Live. I'm your host, Tony Doody, and I'm pleased to be joining you from my professional home at Rutgers University. We broadcast on the Higher Ed Live network, and you can tune into Student Affairs Live along with my brilliant friend and co-host, Heather Shea, Wednesdays at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. In a moment, I'll introduce you to our guests, but I can't do that without first giving a shout out to the sponsors that make Student Affairs Live possible. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a digital-first agency committed to tailored solutions that drive real results. Have you ever wondered what prospective teens are thinking when they receive and read or ignore your institution's recruitment marketing? The third study in the Myth-Busting series in partnership with NRCCUA is the first time to focus on the complete enrollment marketing mix. Sign up now and receive early access to the research results in a white paper releasing later this month. This broadcast is also sponsored by ACPA, College Student Educators International. Support for Student Affairs Live is one of the many ways ACPA provides innovative professional development. Visit myacpa.org to discover additional personal and professional development opportunities. I want to take a moment to thank Kate Zulo and Robin Janice who are helping to monitor the back channel and forwarding to me your best content and questions from the Twitterverse. And finally, I'm very happy to have join us today a wonderful guest. Really been looking forward to this conversation. Could I each have you introduce yourself and describe your current role and why this topic is important to you? Let's start with you, Pam.
Okay, I'm Pam Watts. I'm the Executive Director for NIRSA, Leaders in Campus Recreation. And from the association perspective, this topic is particularly important to us because we understand the impact it can have on student success, not only the traditional measures of recruitment, retention, graduation, but also some of the challenges facing higher ed today with mental health and issues around anxiety, even funding, student engagement, employee engagement, and the like.
Great. George, you want to go next?
Sure. I'm George Brown, Assistant Vice Provost for Student Affairs here at University of Minnesota Twin Cities, and also Director of University Recreation and Wellness. And much like Pam, I'm drawn to this topic because the incredible importance it has over that 4+ year time that a student is enrolled and matriculating on a campus. But I think as we are beginning to see more and more that life and career readiness that accrues afterwards, I'm very intrigued by some of the branding and some of the things that we are able to do in that relatively short time that a student is on campus and what translates to a lifetime beyond their academic experience.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, Chris, you're up.
Yeah, so I'm Chris Wise. I'm an Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs at Virginia Tech, where I have supervision of 5 health and well-being departments, those being recreational sports, our counseling center, our services for our health services center, services for students with disabilities, and then a 5th department that we call Hokey Wellness, which was created 3 years ago that brings together our employee wellness folks, our health education folks, and our campus alcohol center folks all under one department here for the last 3 years. Reasons why this is important to me. For one, I've worked at Virginia Tech for 30 years, primarily in the recreation department. And during those years, about 10 years ago, I saw a program that was developed in our counseling center and our rec program that had a positive impact on a few students' lives that kind of opened my eyes to how important things like exercise can be, not only to physical issues, but also to mental health related issues. And so that's one reason I've continued to see some of these programs grow and have wanted to do more with them. The other one is I have 2 children that are college age. I have a 22-year-old grad student at North Carolina State University, and I have an 18-year-old high school senior who will be going to James Madison University next year. They're both college athletes, but they also have had struggles, and their friends have had struggles. And through the last 9 or 10 years of parenting teenagers and 4 years of parenting a college student, it's become quite obvious to me some of the challenges that this generation faces that maybe some of us in my older generation did not face. And so those 2 things combined have really opened my eyes to the importance of what we can do and how we can integrate well-being on a college campus to support our students.
Great. So that leaves us to the definition of well-being. George, I'm hoping you can kind of provide a foundation for us here.
Yeah, I think this is part of the challenge in this area, defining it, because as we're going to talk about today, it is broadly based. It's very holistic. As we look at the domains of wellness and or well-being, it continues to grow. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that we introduced intellectual or occupational or financial well-being, and we know that they're all inexplicably and just intertwined and interchanging and always kind of mediating each other. But I think what's exciting in this field, Tony, right now is that the evolution of the definition of well-being is really around the idea of what I think, in my own definition, potential and capacity. I'm a big proponent of an environment that creates a potential and a capacity for people to learn and develop and be as happy is sort of a tough word, happy and content. But I think all of this plays into the idea that unless we create an environment where people's potential and capacity to be well, to be actively well in all the domains that we're going to talk about today, I think we're really shortchanging ourselves. So it is a very dynamic interpretation, but I do know that creating that environment is really, to me, the most foundational part of being well.
So let's go. There are so many definitions, there are models that have 5 dimensions of wellness, or 7 dimensions, or 9 dimensions. Can you briefly touch on it? And the 9 are not all the same 9 necessarily. So can you touch on some of those?
Yeah, I think in our world, Chris knows this from his many years working in campus recreation at Virginia Tech, and me at Minnesota, and at my previous institutions as well. And Pam, as the executive director of NIRSA, we tend to sometimes be seen as the purveyors of physical well-being, and I think that's well noted, and I think that's just. But as Chris mentioned, I think the role that we are emerging to play now in the emotional and the mental well-being, I think we play an incredibly strong role with some of our programs and services in terms of spiritual well-being and purpose and life value. I personally think the great unknown of the wellness domains that I'd like to see more work on is the social well-being. And that is the interrelationship that each of us has in our various communities, whether it's student to student, student to staff, student to faculty. I am absolutely amazed at the power of supportive relationships. And I think student athletes, to Chris's point, with his sons playing at that level, I think they represent some of the best cases for teamwork and connectiveness that we all strive for on our campuses.
Fantastic. So I got a question before the show emailed to me from Jeff Cox from USC, and he asked the question, how do we avoid this wishy-washy perspective of wellness and gain buy-in from our constituents? So Chris, I want to ask you directly, how do you make a case for focusing on well-being, particularly as it relates to the academic mission?
Yeah. Well, first, I think that we should all, in higher education, support the education of the whole student. And I think well-being is a critical part of supporting the education of the whole student. And hopefully that's a part of everyone's academic mission. Yes, students need deep knowledge in their discipline and in their career field. And that's something that, institutions have done really, really well. But it's also important to make sure that our students have the ability to care for themselves in all areas of their life, whether that's through programs that we offer and techniques that we teach them to kind of care for themselves, or whether that's through resilience that they build on their own when they come into challenging times, and that we provide that necessary support to help them build that resilience. So certainly I think the institutional benefits are clear. Pam mentioned them earlier. Things like student retention. I mean, that's high on everyone's list right now. It's something that all administrators are interested in. As we help students learn to take care of themselves, we make and improve the resources of our institutions. Right now, we're putting a lot of resources into kind of reactive programming and reactive care for students. The more preventative care we can put in, maybe we can shift those resources a little bit. And then also equipping students to have fulfilled lives as graduates and fulfilled lives as employees down the road. The Gallup study, and I think Pam will talk to some of this, and I can too, but the Gallup studies that we've undertaken have shown that college graduates, that their odds of thriving in all areas of well-being more than double when they've had their college prepare them for life outside of work. And so I think that's a big part of what we're trying to do. And the better our alums feel about their experience, the better for all of us. The better resources they provide back, the better sharing they provide back, the better message they send, testimonials they send. And so I think all those are benefits and all those support the case of well-being being a major component of an academic institution's mission.
Great. So you mentioned the
Tony, can I add to that a little bit? One thing I hear from members that's been a successful strategy when they're getting into this, and maybe they're getting some resistance around those words, wellness or well-being, like your viewers suggested, is you can understand and know, the theories, the practices, the language around well-being and wellness, but pay attention to your university culture. Lean into where your university is having the conversation or having the challenge. And so for some universities that may be around grit and resilience, or for some universities that may be around mental health, for some universities that may be around civility. And so, on a practical level, pay attention to the conversation on your campus and lean in there. You can know you're doing wellness and well-being, but, like we've always said, we have to teach we have to speak the language of those we're trying to work with or engage with.
Tony, if I might add, I hate to add to this question, but I think our higher ed administrators, our highest administrators, have pointed out the issues that are most important to them. And frequently you can find information about those. It might be race relations on campus, or financial affordability of college, mental health challenges that a lot of students are facing nowadays. Again, enrollment and retention, especially in a time when many are predicting less students will be attending college. And so, everybody's positioning for a lot of things around the next generation of enrollment. And I think well-being provides areas in all of these that we can work with. I think what we do helps in all of those types of areas. And those are areas that college presidents and, vice presidents of student affairs frequently mention when they talk about the things that are challenging on their campuses. Now, some people do think that term wishy-washy is interesting. I think some people do think that things like mindfulness and meditation, where's the scientific evidence? Where's the evidence-based proof that these things work? But I believe you see a lot of that coming out now. And I think if people look to that, they'll find that there's been a great deal of information over the last 5 to 10 years around some of those things. And, it's just beginning, but I think it's going to be an important component for students to learn.
Great. So you mentioned the Gallup Purdue Index report, and Pam, I'm hoping that you can share some of the highlights of that report. It essentially examined the relationship between the student experience and the pursuit of a good job and a better life.
Yeah, and that was one of the parts of the report that I liked. It wasn't just about a job or a salary, right? They were trying to, get after aspects of a life well lived was one of the terms they used, and that, a university should be preparing their students for a life well lived after college, not just a career or a job. Those two things are certainly interwoven and relate to one another, and they have lots of data about that in the report. But what they found boiled down to 4 aspects: that it didn't matter where you went to college, it mattered what types of experiences you had in college. And the 4 biggest drivers that they found in their study was having a professor, and I would argue that probably includes faculty, staff, administrator, right? They just see them as adults. A professor who cared about you and made them excited to learn and encouraged them to pursue their dreams. Having an internship or a job to apply their classroom learning in a real world environment. Being actively involved in extracurricular activities or organizations, and then working on projects that took a semester or more to complete. All of these, they pointed out in the study, really go back to feeling supported and having deep learning experiences, that combination of in the classroom and outside of the classroom, the social connections like George was referencing earlier, and getting after some things in a real deep and meaningful way. So that's, kind of a summary of the report. I think Chris and George can speak to, some of how that plays out on their campus.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the mission of higher education, to prepare productive citizens for a global adventure, and I think we're absolutely shortchanging them. I keep going back to the words with well-being. If we're really trying to get at the why or the case statement for it, I think this is really foundational to your experience. I would suggest that students who go abroad, who study abroad or have an opportunity to do that, or do embedded internships, I would submit that they're never going to be as prepared for the rigors and the challenges of those experiences if they are not well in at least some of the domains that we propose and that we try to prepare them for. We're onboarding 18 to 25, 26-year-olds in a traditional, and then other students in a non-traditional way every day to be foundational for preparation for life. I don't think that's overstating it one bit.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, anything to add?
I'll just add, Tony, that we were lucky here, and we had our president commission the Gallup study for Virginia Tech, and a lot of the results that Pam talked about are exactly what we had on that initial Gallup survey that we did, and then we're following it up. We followed up with just students. We did alumni as well, and we found that the difference in our alumni and our students is clearly something that you can see, and so it leads me to believe that there tends to be more work that we need to do earlier on campus. Our alums are thriving for the most part. We've had a good report on that, but it didn't necessarily always match with our students while they're here. And so a lot of that is looking back. I think a lot of us can look back and understand experiences that we've had that were powerful, that we didn't know were powerful when we were in them. But I think a lot of that also goes to what we're able to provide them on campus when they're here. And so we're going to study that again and see if we're using that to try to see if we can make a difference and improve some of those marks with our actual students that are in school when we study them as opposed to our alums. So it's a great study. It's a great one for people to use.
So Chris, is there any data to support specific seasons or I guess transition points in the student's academic career that might be particularly troublesome for students relative to well-being?
That's a great question, Tony. I don't know of any data right off that might support seasonal transitions. I mean, we've all heard of kind of the sophomore slump, and we've all heard of winter blues and some of those things that affect all of us, not just college students. But I'm not positive that I've been able to locate, and I've talked to our counseling staff about students they see anything that's seasonal. But certainly there are transitional points in students' lives that begin to make a difference. And so, for example, the American Psychological Association published a paper recently that identifies the following as events that are related to having a large impact on someone who's seriously considered suicide. And the top ones of these are emotional and physical pain, someone who's experiencing that right now, someone who's been in a romantic relationship breakup or problem, people who are having problems with school, friends or family problems, financial problems, alcohol and drug problems, sexual assault, relationship violence. So many of those that we're actively working towards trying to improve upon on college campuses can be triggers to folks that are, in a mental illness place where they may be considering suicide. And obviously you can look at some of these and realize that they come at certain times. I mean, when freshmen come on campus, a lot of them, are coming out of a romantic relationship, maybe because they're going to different campuses or whatever the case may be. They're leaving their family for the first time for long periods of time. And so, I think we can see some trends of time based on some of these trigger trends, but I don't think that they relate. I haven't seen data that says that they relate directly to seasonal type things. So, but I will say at Virginia Tech, and I just got the numbers this morning for this, our counseling center sees 18% of who they see are freshmen, 20% are sophomore, 23 are junior, 22 are senior, and 15% are grads. And so it's across all levels, that we have on campus that are seeking out counseling for whatever reasons. And so I don't know that there's a certain time in one's career pattern that might happen. Certainly we do see some challenges occasionally with senior level students who are facing debt, facing the prospect of maybe not having a job right out of school. And our counseling center sometimes is a little bit more reactive to those folks because that can be a trigger as well a lot of times. But I don't know of any solid data on seasonal stuff right now, but that's some data that our counseling center has prepared.
Right.
Tony, I think to that point, I think what we're going to find is, like Chris said, it may not be a seasonal, but it may be around on our counseling center, and I think it's no different than any other. We're finding an acute acknowledgement of accessibility and affordability of education. And I think that's transcending any seasonal point to the point where getting in school, staying in school, whether it's food security, whether it's housing security, any of these things, and they tend to be a lot mediated by an economic issue. So that's going to blur any of the seasons to where this is going to be a pervasive year-round challenge.
So George, you shared with me yesterday, and we're gonna share it out during this episode, the Okanagan Charter, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And it really speaks to developing wellness at an entire campus, for an entire campus at a community level. So I think I know the answer to this from you, but what, if any, responsibility or obligation does a university have for supporting and promoting a culture of wellness, not just for students, but for faculty and staff?
Yeah, and I think the schools that are doing this are to be applauded. I think Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, Simon Fraser in Canada, there are schools that are really applying the whole process behind the Okanagan Charter is, and I'm glad you're going to be able to share it out with your viewers, because I think it's an important document. It really speaks to the community as a whole. From a top-down, bottom-up approach, everyone has a responsibility to the well-being of the campus community. And I think when you look at it holistically, again, I go back and I may be really harping on this. When you go back to it, it's really about people supporting each other, and that people in a community feel a sense of community. And I think the Okanagan Charter really quite eloquently and simply says we're all responsible to each other in our community. So if you subscribe even moderately to that theory, then it only makes sense that you blur the line between what faculty and staff have and what students have. I mean, for a lot of the health behaviors that we're dealing with today, they don't know any distinction between whether you're a student or an employee of the campus. And I think sometimes there's an economy of scales when we tackle. We've learned this with smoking cessation and no tobacco campuses. We've learned that if we attack this from a community-based standpoint, we actually make some progress in these areas. So yeah, I know resources and silos being what they are. Many of us in student well-being, recreation programs, health centers, counseling centers, we're funded through student fee dollars. So I understand the economics of, okay, faculty and staff tend to be out of a different pool, be it human resources or whatnot. But I think there are low-hanging fruit where we can take faculty and staff and student well-being and not necessarily have to marginalize or not treat them the same. And I think the campuses that are doing that are seeing some of the greatest rewards right now.
Yeah, Tony, that kind of drove our move of a Hokie Wellness Department, where we brought in our employee wellness and our student wellness pieces together. Now, you'll find that there are some programs that are certainly more targeted to our faculty and staff, and there's certainly some programs that are more targeted to students. But as George mentioned, there are an awfully lot of programs that are really the same for both of those groups. And we found that they come together fairly well and can learn from each other when experiencing those programs. And so that is at least something that's worked well for us, bringing our wellness component, our well-being component, under one kind of hub, no matter whether you're a faculty, staff member, or a student, and then those folks working out in the different areas that they can work in.
So, Pam, for viewers who might not know, I was in recreation probably 12 years ago, for 15 years, and I don't recall hearing the term wellness, 20 years ago in the recreation field. Mm-hmm. How has NIRSA evolved over the years to address this area?
Yeah, I think NIRSA and then the profession, we're certainly shifting from wellness to well-being, right? And well-being is understood to be a more holistic approach. This is beyond physical well-being. This is beyond, nutrition and, smoking cessation programs, diet and exercise. I also believe the profession has really shifted to understand that recreation is the platform, it's not the end. And so, I think the first kind of big shift around this was back when, probably 10 to 20 years ago, when we really began to understand the work that happened inside campus recreation under a student development model, right? This wasn't sport for sport's sake. This was sport to develop students and fitness to develop students and all the aspects and programs in a recreation center. And so I think today around well-being, again, we still understand that recreation is a platform, and one that, frankly, on the majority of campuses engages more students than any other department on campus, right? And so, with that kind of student engagement, with those skills in student engagement, with that kind of access, and to students, but like we were saying earlier, also to faculty and staff and often the surrounding community through different programs. We can use that engagement to promote aspects of well-being, to promote health, again, using this platform of recreation and this access to students and the faculty, staff, and campus community.
Fantastic. So, Chris, I'll direct this question to you because I know you're organized this way, and George, I think you are too, but what are the benefits of having multiple departments organized under a single umbrella, a well-being, wellness umbrella?
No. Well, I think immediately the first thing that comes to mind is it makes collaborations easier to have and it makes them stronger. When you are in an environment where you come together as a group more often, it's that same component that we were just talking about. The more you're around people, the stronger your bonds become. And so thus the stronger any program that needs to work across multiple departments can become. For example, having our director of recreational sports, the weekly updates about what's going on in our health center or the numbers that our counseling center is seeing, she immediately in those meetings begins to think about, how does this relate to my role? How does this relate to the Department of Recreation's role? And that's true for all of our directors in all of our programs. And I also think that when you're organized that way, it allows many of your entry level and your assistant director type positions, coordinator type positions to become more familiar with each other and to do more work together, even at those lower, I don't want to say lower, but even at those beginning levels, where sometimes a person might have an interest that's a little bit outside of their area that they would like to explore, and they just need the means or the connections to begin to kind of explore that with other people. And so we've seen some great examples of this. The thing I mentioned when I first said that what got me interested in this was a collaboration between our counseling center and between rec sports. I was the director at the time. The collaboration came from a coordinator of recreation and one of our counselors. And eventually, as it made its way to myself and our director of the counseling center, we were asked for the resources to support it. And it was easy to try it on a pilot scale, but it immediately became so valuable that it made me realize that here are two people that came together, and we've been lucky. We've all been under one roof for quite some time, even when our reporting structure wasn't always there. And so it immediately became something where these two folks that interact with each other on a daily basis were able to come up with a program that became a real valuable program and really changed the direction of a lot of what we do here. So I think that's a big part of it. I think it also makes the handoffs easier. If someone's coming from counseling to recreation or from student health to Hokie Wellness, and you are familiar with each other, that handoff looks much more seamless to the student, which I think is very important and keeps that student from maybe feeling awkward, in a situation where they might have started with one program and are being kind of handed off to another program that can also help them with some of their challenges. And again, I'll just say that we've been a little bit lucky here, and we didn't necessarily design it this way back in 1998, but our counseling, our student health, and our recreation programs have been under the same roof since then. And so it's allowed an environment of knowing each other, even if you just see each other coming and going or sharing a break room or sharing whatever it might be. And so I know a lot of institutions are looking at and beginning to move in a way where their organization might be similar. And I know a few that are starting to design facilities that'll do this. We're actually going to build a second one or renovate a second one here to do it so that we can spread out a little bit. We're still going to be under the two roofs, but we're going to be spread out on campus a little bit more so that we can hopefully engage even more of our colleagues on campus to become involved in some of the programs that we do. So I do think it makes it easier. I don't think it has to be that way, but I think it certainly makes it easier.
So if units are not organized under a single umbrella, how can universities work together to provide a more intentional, more seamless experience? And who should take the lead in that kind of endeavor?
So, my perspective is anyone can take the lead because I've seen it happen here. Again, it could be a coordinator, it could be an assistant director, it could be anybody. But I think the challenge is getting the buy-in from those that are outside of your organization. Could be difficult at first. My initial suggestion, we had a committee that came together to talk about well-being on campus and all those, all the aspects of well-being and what they involved. And we tried to have a wide-reaching committee to do that. And so I think a committee can be formed with all those who have an interest in this. But my advice would be that committee's first goal would be to study and research what's been done at some other institutions, whether they're combined or whether they've done it through committee work. And I think that would help give a better understanding of why, this leader is coming out and asking for people to come together to support well-being across an integrated model. And I also think it provides some successful results that some institutions have had that you can strive towards. That might get the buy-in a little quicker from someone outside of your organization. The siloed effect is still there. A lot of times people, kind of have their turf feelings about things, and they might wonder, why is someone from recreation wanted to step into the counseling center? Well, I think if you can bring some folks together and show them some of the work that's being done, then I think that opens up that buy-in a little bit more and can help that. So I think that would be my initial thought of how to handle it. I know we've had great conversations started by everybody, by our counseling center, by our disability services team. But I will say that, and again, I have a recreation background as well, but I will say that I see more of our recreation people maybe making the initial step towards a new program. But I believe the reason for that is they're much more concentrating, and much more of their programs is around preventative work. And whereas our counseling center and our health center is typically doing reactive work to folks who are ill. And so I think it makes sense that those who have a kind of preventative thinking mind might be the first ones to step out around some preventative programming. But what I've been impressed with here with our counseling center is we have some counselors that have done great work, combining with some of our folks and beginning to do some group work and some preventative work. As a matter of fact, at a retreat that we had as a 5-department area that's organized together, we had some counselors who believe in yoga and enjoy yoga, and some rec and wellness folks who do it, that came together in a yoga setting at a retreat that developed a group counseling effort around yoga. We've been doing it now for about 1.5 years, and it's really seeming to be pretty beneficial. We don't have high groups of students doing it, but we have students who are finding their way in that group. And so again, those are just the kind of things that can happen if you get the right kind of people with a similar interest together.
So we've talked about the benefits and some of the strategies for creating wellness across campus, across the community. George, can you talk about some of the challenges we might face in creating this culture?
Well, Chris mentioned silos, and I think in any kind of academic setting, you're going to have privileges of ownership where people feel like they are the esteemed experts, and in many cases, they probably are. What I think needs to expand that conversation is that we can be experts in our area, but what if we bring our expertise together in a coalition? And I think this is where things like Healthy Campus 2020 and the next version coming up with 2030 is going to be really important to continue to discuss, is the synergy that comes from breaking down silos. I think the other part of this that makes this really challenging is we don't really want to bear what's wrong with us. Whether we're in a health center or a recreation or counseling or student media or dean of students office or student activities, we all have areas that we don't necessarily do as well. And I think there's that certain bearing of the soul that it comes with saying, we're not as good as this, but maybe if we worked with XYZ unit, we would be. There's some ego there. I would acknowledge that. I think that we all know that happens in higher ed. I think there's also a lack of clarity sometimes in developing goals and objectives. Start from the end. I've always said start from what you want to be and work your way back. And I think sometimes with the best intentions in higher ed, we jump right in. And then when a program fails or an activity doesn't net the audience that we want, we scratch our heads and go, what went wrong? Well, we didn't really articulate what our goals were. In many cases, we don't promote it well. We don't use genuine collaboration. I've heard some interesting things from my NIRSA colleagues recently on some other calls. We're moving beyond partnerships and beyond collaboration to integration. And I think that is really, really important today to have true synergy. It's got to be through an integrated effort. It's hard. It's hard because you have to check a lot of things at the door, and it's not easy.
I'm thinking in my head how to unpackage the concept of integration and how that's different from collaboration. But I think I get where you're going with it.
Well, I'm going to give full credit to a colleague at Georgia Tech who, much like the Virginia Tech model, Susie Harrington, is doing that on their campus there. They are working to, again, blur all the lines between faculty, students, alums. It's a community-wide effort. And I think when you do have those somewhat artificial lines disseminated and removed, you have much more chance to be integrated and not just somewhat collaborative.
So it's pushing, not pushing, but bestowing responsibility for everyone for well-being, right? The entire community.
Yeah, I think Pam said it, and I don't want to jump on what Pam was saying earlier, but it was so profound. Meet people where they are. Find where they are and what their definition of health and media. We had a discussion some time ago with student media, and they didn't see themselves as a health educator. And we scratched our head and we said, well, let's just explore a little bit more about what you do. They talked about their advertising and some of their bars and places that were advertising 2-for-1, 3-for-1 specials. Maybe backing away from that, not allowing that. All of a sudden, that became a health message. So it's meeting people where they are. I have an adage that I believe every one of us on a campus is a health educator in one form or another.
The great analogy, Tony, that I hear is it's the same with EDI, right? Equity, diversity, inclusion isn't just the responsibility of the diversity office on campus. It's the responsibility of everyone on campus. And I think we aspire to have well-being viewed the same way if we're really going to be successful at this.
Great point, Pam.
So that's somewhat related to organizational change, and a former guest on Higher Ed Live for organizational change was Lauren Rollman, who's now working at the company Workshop as a strategist, used to be at University of Michigan. He asks if you know of any benchmark wellness or well-being facilities that house more than recreation, and can any of you describe innovative ways that those offices, units, people, programs work well together to achieve these goals?
Well, I think you've heard a great example with Virginia Tech. We've mentioned Georgia Tech. They are aligning, facility and org chart and resources, right? When I think of examples, I was trying to think of examples outside of that. Wake Forest comes to mind with a pervasive marketing campaign that crosses departments and crosses the campus. Mm-hmm. I also think about Georgia Tech, and Chris, help me, who's the other one? Oh, NC State, who has a little digital certification program around certifying departments on campus as well departments, and they have some criteria they've built and a process, and then there's some branding around that. Some again, simple digital badge type branding. These aren't high cost things that you have to do if you're not building a new building or have the resources to realign your division.
Yeah,
Chris, George, what other examples you know of?
Yeah, so Tony, I'll add that. Well, first of all, here, like I said, we kind of lucked into, if you will, having our buildings together because we were doing it from a financial model, not so much from an organizational model in the mid 90s. But it's worked so well that now we're in the beginning stages of a project to renovate a larger facility in the middle of campus on our drill field, War Memorial Hall, into exactly what you're talking about, a center that is designed with well-being being a cornerstone of it, not only having counseling and recreation and Hokie Wellness as a part of that facility, but also having our academic programs around it's escaping me, nutrition and exercise academic programs that are going to be a part of that facility where we'll share some areas, thus being able to share some of the students that are in those areas to become some of the leaders of what we're trying to do in the well-being area. So that's an example here that's a couple of years away, but it could be one that people could see grow from the ground up. But honestly, some other places that I'm familiar with that I haven't seen necessarily, but I've done some research on, South Dakota State University has a great program combining well-being for folks that are in that part of the country. I know the University of Richmond, for a smaller school, is doing some of this work right now and going through the exact same process at the exact same timeline that we are. And then California State Northridge has a outstanding center. The Duke Integrative Medicine Center is a good center. So a lot of folks have built these kind of integrative oasis type places that are doing some of this work. And those are smaller investments than maybe a large rec center that's combined with your counseling center, that's combined with, your health center or whatever the case may be. And so I think there's a magnitude of levels that this kind of work can be done. And if you have some sort of facility that kind of allows that to happen, then folks from all over campus, if you design it right, can come in and use some of these different design techniques of offices nowadays to kind of have that as a secondary place to do the work that's integrated work together. And so there are some out there. Those are the ones that come to mind to me immediately, but I'll try to think if there's more. George, are you familiar?
Yeah. Well, University of Miami has an integrated wellness facility, and sometimes you're just fortunate that at a point in time you build a facility generationally that allows you to do an integrated wellness model where counseling and the health centers and rec are all literally, embedded in each other. And I think that's wonderful. But I think to our viewers and listeners today, I think you really need to understand subtle things like physical therapy within rec facilities to bring it out of the medical model and bring it in there. Pet therapy in unused spaces and facilities. These are fairly easy to do ways to integrate without, again, a generational build out, if you will, of a multi-million-dollar building. I think programming, it can be, there's a subtle creativity to that again, this goes back to bringing people together and getting their interpretation of what health, wellness, and well-being means. And then saying, how can, as Pam said, one of the great virtues of rec centers is traffic. We have lots of people trafficking our facilities. So we are a great place for exposure, for people to really learn about health and wellness things like pet therapy or coming up on the 4th floor on a Monday and interacting with the pets. It's simple, but it's very effective.
Yeah. Great point, George.
So I love that for these episodes, we not just talk about philosophy and theory and research, but we also share practical examples. So I want to get into some practical examples for each of the 8, 9, 10 dimensions of wellness. So let's start off. Pam, can you share some interesting programs that you've seen around physical?
Yeah, and physical is probably the easiest, right? When thinking about a recreation center. So I was trying to think of some of the non-traditional examples, and I think there's always been a pervasive drive in this organization. If we're consistently seeing 75 to 80% of the student body, how do we get after that other 20%? And it's really about understanding the barriers to come in and participate in physical activity. Maybe not restricting that to what happens inside the rec center on the fields. Meeting them where they are. I've seen development of workout spaces in graduate student housing at UCLA, for example. I think it's also, as higher ed is facing a student body that has more economic challenges. Again, another Southern California school, said, look, my first gen women, like their biggest barrier to working out is they can't afford a jog bra. So how do I get them even the clothing that they can wear to come in and work out? Those kind of things.
Wow.
Yeah, our students, our student center at the University of Minnesota is selling hijab, a Muslim wear now that students can use when they work out in the facilities. And again, that's just identifying a need. It's very simple, but very, very effective to those students.
We're also watching weight rooms get sort of separated a little bit because there's different styles of men and women who like to lift weights. And there's, kind of that traditional stereotype of the, predominantly male kind of heavy lifters, sort of culture and group. And that can be intimidating to others who may want to come in and lift weights. So then there's another area of the weight room that, maybe is designed differently with a different look and feel to it. I've seen that on several campuses.
Tony, I'll just add a different perspective of a program that we have here. It's called our HEART program, but it's basically a referral program for folks with eating disorders. And those folks can come across from many areas. They can come through our women's center. They can come through counseling. But a lot of times they come from recreational sports professionals. And so our HEART program brings together some rec sports professionals, our counseling professionals, and our student health center professionals as the referral agents for these students to come in and talk to begin to improve some of the physical challenges that they're facing with eating disorders, whether that be too much exercise activity or whether that be binge eating, some of the things they go through. So again, it's just a program that brings together 3 components that can work together and help these types of students out in a physical way.
All right. How about emotional dimension? Some interesting initiatives or programs.
Well, I've already talked about, that counseling yoga option, but we have a variety of different group counseling programs that develop through, again, working with our colleagues over in student engagement or our colleagues in other areas that have talked about some of the needs of organizational folks. And so we develop counseling options that might fit different needs than just, freshmen or dealing with this particular mental health challenge or whatever the case may be. But even our rec sports program started the referral program that I talked about, where counselors refer their students to exercise and to fitness as an alternative to medicine. And that has been very popular and has increased. We have about 460 students who come through that any given year now. Last year we had 460 some, which has been very popular on this campus. And then our rec program developed a How a Happiness book club. And it's just about thriving and being happy. And again, that was done through recreation, through one of the folks that works in wellness and through recreation. And it's become a very popular program that we offer each semester. It's kind of a classroom structured setting over reading chapters of the book, The How of Happiness. So those are a few things that we've done. We've also got a variety of programs that Hokie Wellness puts on, things like Friends Helping Friends in Distress. And they do them for different sections of campus all over as more preventative measures so that people know, if I see this in a friend, what is it? What might it mean? And what potentially should I be doing? And so those are just some of the things that we're trying to do.
So I want to, two of the dimensions often cited are academic and intellectual. George, can you explain the difference between the two and perhaps give an example in each area?
Well, I think the academic or the intellectual, I think what we've learned about students today is that it's hard to matriculate. It's hard to get through the rigors of everything that goes into being a student. And I think developing support groups, I think some of the things that we're seeing on campuses today, where we're identifying students who come to campus with challenges, first generation students, economic empowerment, food insecurity, and identifying wherever, safely and confidentially we can identify those students and creating support groups for them. But I think, Tony, what's really in play here, and I think all of our good work will kind of fall a little bit short if we don't recognize the key role that the faculty play in this. Identifying students at risk early in their college education, getting them to some of the places that are under Chris's umbrella, and identifying before these problems become so pervasive. I think this is perhaps, when we talk about challenges, maybe the single most difficult challenge is to get our faculty, particularly some of our older senior faculty, to recognize the role they play in the community in terms of that intellectual well-being, creating curiosity. One of the things that I talk to some of the junior faculty that are coming in and tenure track programs is getting students to have an intellectual curiosity. To ask questions about it. There was an interesting article today in the Chronicle of Higher Education that talked about mentorships and how important it is to identify early in a student's life those key relationships where they can go to a professor, maybe not even in their major or in their discipline, who they can trust to have those conversations about reading and studying and inquisition and learning. We really need that in the academy, and I think that's what makes, I think intellectual curiosity actually feeds academic well-being.
And let's move on to financial, some interesting initiatives and programs around financial dimension.
Well, I'll say we're in some early stages of our financial wellness programming. We have started last year, and this is the second year we've done it, with some seminars that we opened up for students to come to that we sponsor through our Hokie Wellness program. But we're beginning to do more work with some of our folks in the business school, in our finance area, to try to develop some partnerships across those areas so that we can tap into some of our experts over there to provide some of the financial well-being through our programming methods that we might do. So, for example, we're not here yet, but for example, we're working with the business school to develop a program whereby their junior and senior level finance students can become peer educators in our Hokie Wellness program around financial opportunities for students and around financial well-being, so that students can learn from their other student peers that have some of those expertise, or at least some deeper knowledge of those areas, Sometimes students like to learn from their peers. We've learned that in our counseling center. We've learned it in our health education area. We've learned it in our alcohol area. And I think the financial area might be another place that'll be. So we're in the beginning of meetings to discuss some of that kind of stuff, but we've had some pretty good support from our financial side. And I'll mention one other thing that we're doing as a university that really wasn't necessarily through us or Hokie Wellness, but through our conversations. Our business school opened their intro personal finance class. They opened more sections of that. And now a lot of our majors that aren't business majors are allowed to take that as a math core class, so that there is an opportunity for, again, the academic folks to be addressing some of this financial wellness just by having a class that might teach some of those important aspects open to more people than just people in the business school. And so that started this year. They've opened a couple extra sections of it, and we've seen some pretty positive momentum through that. I feel like it's our responsibility through Hokie Wellness and through the counseling center, and when we interact with folks with some of those financial concerns, to make them aware of that opportunity, because that opportunity may be greater than what we're doing through our seminars right now. So just another, different twist on something that's happened here recently that we're excited about seeing where it goes.
Now, I know we have a lot of audience members listening in on today's episode, so I want to encourage folks, if you know of any great initiatives or programs at your institution or perhaps another institution, please share the links, if you have them, out on Twitter so other folks can take advantage of that and check them out. So I haven't covered all the dimensions. Is there a particular initiative or program that any of you want to highlight that addresses one of them in particular?
I think the only thing I want to bring up, George brought it up earlier, and I want to emphasize it, is I think the social aspect is a critical aspect because of the generation and how our generations are using screen times and all those other things from such an early age, that the social wellness aspect is much more difficult, I believe, than what we might assume in our generation, at least, before some of those things were there. I know one of the things that I like to do is, I like to hear from our students, and whether it's students that I know that work in different places in the departments of mine, or whether it's students that I know from the local area that go to school here simply because I have kids in that age range now, and so I recognize some of those folks on campus. I like to just ask them a couple of questions. I like to ask them how things are going, and 9 times out of 10, most students are going to tell you things are going well. And then I like to follow that up with, has it always been that way since you've been here? And the interesting thing that I have found out through those questions are a lot of people will talk about their freshman year experience being difficult to find a place to belong and to find a place that makes them feel like they felt in high school, where they can walk into it and immediately be accepted or immediately feel at home in a place like that. And it's interesting that some of these students continuously will say, my freshman year was really difficult and I wasn't sure I wanted to go back for my sophomore year, but I found, and finding it can be X, it can be student media. It can be, a lot of times it's a job in the rec center, because I do talk to a lot of those folks. It can be, a cultural engagement center maybe that they didn't know existed or that's grown on them. It can be any number of things that opens up their social life to a different level than what they might experience when they first come on our campuses. And so I think programs around social engagement with our student engagement areas and things like that are definitely one of those integrated areas that we probably need to spend more time working through, more understanding, and probably if there were more research to be done around one of these aspects, I would love to see it done around the social aspect. Our wellness group has developed a few programs around it. They're piloting one this semester, and I can't remember the name of it. I apologize, but it's got to do with screen time. And one of our health educators came up and shared it with me yesterday, and it's a really valuable program. Any of you all out there who have kids in that age group or whatever, you know what we're talking about, and their concept of what a social engagement looks like sometimes is a lot different than what a social engagement needs to become when you move on into your career field. We use email and we use text, but we do a lot of face-to-face meetings still, in our professional lives. And those are some areas that I believe that, maybe some more research, maybe some conversation should happen around.
And on that topic, I'm gonna do a plug for an old show that we did back in April on mental health and technology. And again, for anyone who has children or even college-age students, if you check out that episode, I promise you will change your thinking, be mildly alarmed at what's happening right now. So we've all touched on it, on this issue of inclusion at some point in today's episode. Pam, can you talk, in broad terms about how our approach to wellness can and should be inclusive?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's a mindset, right? Inclusion is a mindset, and we enjoy this in recreation. I think because the roots of recreation are in sport for all, right? That's where we started. It's sport for all. This isn't elite sport. This isn't varsity sport. This is sport for all. And so, George and I were talking about this a couple of weeks ago. Is that students come into the rec center and they just seem to naturally engage and get along, right? They seem to be, civil and respectful of one another. It just happens, right, around that culture. And that's an inclusive mindset. I think there's an intentional balance between creating a variety of ways. Like we talked earlier about meeting students where they are, understanding the barriers to participating in different programs, aspects of learning and well-being, and trying to break those barriers down. George, why don't you talk a little bit about this idea that they get inoculated in rec, and how do we get them to carry that vaccination? Because I love this philosophy.
Well, yeah, thanks. It's if you believe that what Pam said is true, and I think all of us that have been in campus rec for any length of time probably have seen it, all of a sudden you're respectful on the weight machine. You let somebody work in. You the next game up in pickup, you pick the player on the sideline that's been waiting to play. There is that genuine give and take of civility that, quite frankly, is stark ravingly absent in other walks of our life. So if you believe there's something about being in a recreation facility, a program, or a service, that there is inoculation, that this is some type of vaccination that provides you this, even if it's temporary, how could we take that and transcend the walls of the recreation center? How does that play out in terms of civil discourse and activism? How does that play out in shared responsibility and governance in classroom management? How does that play out in terms of any number of other things that our students and faculty and staff encounter on a different day? I'm not going to be so brazen as to say that we've figured it out. I don't even know what that secret sauce is. But I just know that there are some common denominators when people engage in recreation activities that we would sure like to see them have when they're outside the walls of that rec center, when they're in other parts. And then ultimately, to really tie a bow on this, to transcend that into their career readiness and on in their lives. God knows we need that right now in society.
I love that. I think you're onto something, George.
I don't know. I mean, 30 plus, Chris and I have been in this field for a long time, and I don't think it's anecdotal. I don't think it's by coincidence. Something happens. Maybe it is in the world of recreation and sports and genuine endorphin release that comes from this. All I know is that when the 75 to 80-year-old professor emeritus of biology is on treadmill number 1 and the 19-year-old from upstate Minnesota is on treadmill 2, the one thing they've got in common is sweat. Yeah.
I agree with George. I think, the great equalizer in a lot of cases is sports equipment, sports fitness equipment, weight equipment, all those kinds of things. They might come in a lot of different colors and shapes and whatever, but they're all used for one process. And that one process is for folks who want to try to improve themselves through that activity, whatever that activity might be, or release themselves through that activity, whatever that activity might be. And there is something about, kind of counting heads when you walk through the rec center or whatever that is unique. I like to say it's one of the most diverse places on our campus. And I don't get all over campus all the time, but the diversity on our campus certainly shows itself in our rec center. And so what George is talking about certainly is something that if we could, unwrap and try to figure out, how do we add that to the classroom setting? How do we add that to our social settings? How do we add that to conversation just to get the conversation started? What's the great equalizer for a conversation? Like a ball might be the great equalizer for a recreational activity. Then maybe we're on to something. But I'm with George. I'm not saying anyone's got it figured out, but it's an interesting prospect to pay attention to.
Wow.
So I want to be cognizant of our time, and in the final 2 minutes we have left here, I know we didn't get to all the questions, and I apologize for that, but Can you each share in 30 seconds or less, be concise here, some resources, perhaps websites, books, conferences, newsletters, so that the audience can continue to learn about and explore some of the topics that you covered here today? Pam, you want to start us off?
Sure. I would encourage all to go to the NIRSA website and type in the keywords, health and well-being or building a culture of health. We've produced a series of articles about best practices, promising practices that a variety of campuses have been trying out. There's one on Virginia Tech that highlights much of what Chris is talking about, and several other campuses. So if you want more information on, how people are actually executing around this strategy of well-being, there's lots of great examples on the website, lots of great tools. And we have more coming. We're building that resource all the time. That all lives in the public area of the website, and so it can be accessed by members and non-members alike.
Great. George?
The Okanagan Charter. It's an easy to read 12-page document that really sends a foundational vibe. I think it's worth everyone reading that's remotely in any facet of higher ed. The ACHA Healthy Campus Initiative has a lot of non-proprietary documents in there about capacity building, frameworks, using social ecological model, coalition building. I think that's a good, if you're feeling overwhelmed and some of this wishy-washy about too much, too big, it really breaks it down into digestible nuggets. I would suggest going there first.
Great. Chris?
And I'll just share a couple of things. What started my interest in this really was attending a presentation by John Ratey, and that's spelled Ratey, from Harvard University, when he spoke at NIRSA some years ago about a book called Spark. It was one of the first, I don't do a lot of book reading. I do a lot more article research reading, but not a lot of book reading. It was one of the first books that really captured my mind about how exercise and movement affects the brain and affects learning. And so that kind of opened my eyes to some things. And I will say John's a great follow on all social media, Facebook and Twitter. As a matter of fact, he publishes a lot, or he retweets or does whatever with a lot of articles around some of the science that we're talking about around well-being. Matter of fact, there was a good one on there today called talking about wishy-washy meditation. Meditation for the fidgety skeptics offers practical advice for stressed out cynics. So if you haven't seen that today, I would look up John Ratey on either Facebook or Twitter, where you can find that. A couple other ones. The JED Foundation has done great work around this. So if folks would look into the JED Foundation, I think they would find some interesting things around teenage and college student well-being. There's an article from the Chronicle of Higher Education just last fall called The Student-Centered University that gives you a lot of information on where presidents and higher level administrators are thinking around this. And then the last thing I'll mention is Ben Locke, who's the Director of Psychological Services at Penn State. They house the Center for Collegiate Mental Health on that campus, and they have data from over 380 counseling centers. And Ben had an article that he put out last fall, I believe, and it's called Coping Skills and Growing Pains. And it's Ben Locke, who's the Director of Psychological and Counseling Services at Penn State. Those have all been really good reads for me over the course of the last year as we've continued to try to figure out how to do more integration on this campus and share important information that administrators are talking about.
Wow, those are all fabulous resources. I certainly have my reading list set for the next week or so. We will put all of those links up where I can find them onto our website. So for those who are listening in on an archived episode, hopefully they'll be on the site after today. I want to thank all of you for sharing your time and knowledge with us today. Some great insights, some great wisdom, and some great examples of real strategies and practical initiatives. As always, thanks to our program sponsors, ACPA and M. Stoner. Heather Shea and I will be back next month, and we'll be excited to share that we are doing contested issue debates, and we'll be sharing our lineups for the main stages at both NASPA and ACPA this year. You can receive reminders about this and other great shows by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter. You can also browse the archives at higheredlive.com or subscribe to our iTunes podcast. I'm Tony Doody. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hope you make it a great week, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Take care.